Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your Critique of the Week. It's Friday, March 24th. So glad you could join me. Let's see who we got here. Katie Dozier's here over on Facebook. Hey, Katie. And then over on YouTube, we've got Clayton Clark, James Langford, Tom Barlow, Cindy Gore, Dick Westheimer, and Dee Coleman. Hello to all of you. As everybody trickles in, we'll see who else shows up. But I'll say, as always, this is a typical Critique of the Week. We're going to look at two poems, each from two poets. If you'd like to participate, all you have to do is go to rattle.com/critique. Is that what it's called? Or workshop? I can't remember. I always forget that. Rattle.com/ what is the URL? Rattle.com/critique. Let's see. Rattle.com, yeah, rattle.com/critique. Go to rattle.com/critique. And then you'll see the place you can click to submit on Submittable. It's a submission process just like everything else, except you agree to have your poems critiqued here and nothing else. They're drawn kind of randomly, but also based on things we have to say. I'm going to go through and reply to everybody who has the sort of standard thing where it's like, show, don't tell and stuff. And we don't have to say the same things over and over again. But as long as the poem has some kind of content that we can sort of sink our teeth into, we'll be talking about it on the Critique of the Week. We have about, how many submissions in the queue? About 85 in the queue right now. Some of those I'll be replying to soon, but otherwise we'll just draw those poems out and look at them together to give that workshop experience, which is a really valuable thing, letting poets see how their poems come across in the eyes of strangers. And it's really valuable to do, so leave as many comments as you would. Let's see, Philip Johnson's here. Hey, John. Cindy Putnam Guntherman, John Atkinson, Sharon Ferrante over on Facebook. So we got a nice group of people here. On YouTube, Spartacus is here. Bree Stiglitz, Lisa Seidenberg, too. Hello. So we got about, looks like between the two platforms, about 40 people watching, going over these poems together. We have two poets today, Melissa Coffey, I guess you'd say, Melissa Coffey, and Ryan McCarty. So we'll look at Melissa's poems first, and let's jump right in. So here we go. This is Under the Rubble, and this is, let me see if you can see, Melissa Coffey. Whistles Under the Rubble. For Murat Babaglu after the earthquake in Turkey 2023. So a very recently written poem, a Poets Respond poem almost. This earthquake was what, a month ago or so? Well, here we go. Whistles Under the Rubble. Have you ever tried to whistle with a dry mouth? The lips unmoistened do not water the outgoing breath with melody. The concrete slab of tongue flounders tuneless in its parched cavern. Have you ever tried to whistle under the weight of rubble, the plaster and mortar, and electric entrails of your home, walls collapsed on top of ceilings, on top of you, in the cruel card shuffle of cataclysmic seismic eruptions, an earthquake rupturing the foundations of your town, providence, nation, fault lining the heart of your people into fissures of shock and grief? Buried beneath the place meant to keep us all safe. Imagine him under the jagged puzzle pieces of his kitchen table at which he sipped hot cave with cardamoms just that morning, the grave burden of his splintered sanctity bearing down on his body, familiar objects becoming threats, one hand a scream of shattered bones, already trapped for uncountable hours, but somehow he finds the shard of a song cradled like the longing for sweet melon in his mouth, sending it up through the cracks of broken bricks and chaos, somehow cocooned in dusty hours and darkness, the rasping husp of dehydration. He whistles a halting prayer, a wavering Morse code signal born of ragged breath, emissary from his still beating heart. Beneath the ruins, I try to imagine what he whistled. Was it pop songs or lullabies his mother sang to him as a child to ward off fear of the dark, or the Turkish national anthem, robust notes rising upwards like the sprout of a seed searching for light, for restitution? As day bled into night, not once but thrice in his lightless underworld, how did he whistle without water, mouthful of dust, lungs grappling for air? It is inconceivable. Yet the tenacity and bravery of Murat is a fact, as true as the magnitude of the earthquake. He outwhistled true as the tears on my cheek as I watched the news in another hemisphere, hearing how on the fourth day rescuers heard him following his frail notes of hope until An impossible miracle, he rose from the rubble, hand broken, but the song in his spirit still strong. And so it is a Poet Respond poem. We have this link to the news source, and we might as well click on it and see a picture since we... Yeah, so this is who the poem is about. Murat Babaglo, right here. There we go. Pictures in the Rubble too. Yeah, this is where he was pulled out from. That is an amazing, incredible story. Yeah, stuck for 3 days there. So that's what the poem is about. And I think there's a couple things. Let's see. Whistles Under the Rubble. For Murat Babaglu after the earthquake in Turkey, 2023. And I think that's a good... So Whistles Under the Rubble sort of captures the what we're going to be talking about. And then the epigram for the dedication for Murat Babaglu tells us what it's about too. So we sort of really grounded by the title, which is always nice. Have you ever tried to whistle with a dry mouth? I think it's a great opening because it really makes you feel that sense of... It's the detail of the dry mouth that makes that really work, and it makes you think about that. So I think it's a great way to enter the poem. I think it starts out really well. The lips unmoistened do not water, the outgoing breath with melody. The concrete slab of tongue flounders tuneless in its parched cavern. So I think the great sounds in this opening section too. And we have it's interesting, the thing that stands out the most, just look at the poem, obviously, is the spacing decisions and how much white space we've sort of inserted in the poem. And I wondering what that adds. And the opening section doesn't have that. The opening stanza here, and we sort of break out later. Have you ever tried to whistle under the weight of rubble? And I'm not really sure what's gained by it, because it has regular punctuation. It kind of, to me, slows the poem down a little bit. It makes you sort of look at each word more as if it were a shorter line length. But I'm not sure how everybody's interpretation of reading that would be. There's a sort of a disjointed, sort of fluttering feel when you have a lot of spaces and gaps in the text like that. And I'm wondering what the purpose is, because my favorite stanza was the first where that doesn't happen. I'm not quite sure why it went from not doing that to all of a sudden doing that. Maybe people have some ideas about it. Oops, didn't mean to do that. But anyway, so, but they're great. I love this. The concrete slab of tongue flounders tuneless. The tongue flounders tuneless is a really nice musical turn right there, and use of the line break too. It's parched cavern. I think just a great description. You ever tried to whistle? Let me see what people are saying. So Alexander Abaya says, I feel like life slows down when you're under the rubble. So the added spaces support that sense. Katie Dodger says, I actually like the line breaks. Makes one feel disjointed like an earthquake or tragedy does. Tara Mazalik McMahon says, such great images and language in this poem, but it goes on too long. The conceit stronger to me as a 15 or 18 line poem if it doesn't take me somewhere else in metaphor or leap or anything. Also, great question. Sorry, it jumped. Also, great question in line 1, but no questions later on in the poem, and I think it would make the poem stronger. I pretty much agree with that completely, I think. Katie Dozier said, I love the beginning of this poem. I feel the middle should be cut some, as well as some parts of the language that verges on telling a bit too much. And yeah, so I think, the poem, I'm engaged, but it's a little too long for what it's doing, is my main thing. And then I wonder... we don't have... It is interesting. It feels... The disjointed nature, I think it does, feel like maybe in the midst of a disaster where you're trapped like that, it might represent that in an interesting way. But I do wonder if there more could be done with that. Like, why not the first stanza? And then it starts. And if it were like like aftershocks of the earthquake, which is an interesting thought, you could just... then maybe, why not have, some lines, some stanzas broken and keep this pattern? We have these, the breaks, it has this, it's really 6-line stanzas, as you see, but they become more and more spread out as the poem goes on. And then that breaks away too. And I wonder why we lose that pattern. Does it? Well, yeah, because here there's an extra line. Yeah, but then we keep it. So it sort of moves around that, and I'm not quite sure what the sense of the change is for. And because the thing that it draws your attention so much is an unusual aspect of the poem, that it makes you really wonder why the choice is made. And I feel like it's a little distracting because it's not consistent and there's no obvious explanation for why it's done in the way it is. If the whole poem were sort of in stanzas like this one, then that would make a lot of sense to me. If the whole poem were like this, or if it went sort of back and forth between like jittery stanzas of this size and then non-jittery, it's like the aftershocks of the earthquake come and like rubble shifts maybe. But slowly expanding into bigger and then smaller sections, I just don't understand. And because it's so prominent and grabs your attention so much, it ends up being a mystery that doesn't have much of a payoff to me. And so I wonder why not make this more consistent too. So my two general things would be to shorten the poem up because it feels too long, like a few people have said already, and then make this more consistent or the reason for doing it, that this change more obvious. So let's see. So Mary Lisa Dominicius says, Bled Into Night feels too cliche for me. We'll find that later. We'll pull out some cliche stuff. And Katie Doder says, I'd like a turn to him getting out of the rubble, as I believe he did. Yeah. Jetty Middleton, I think she liked the weights broken out. Yeah. Oh, Cindy Putnam Gunderman says maybe the gaps are his gasping for breath, trying to breathe. That's an interesting interpretation. I like that. Okay. And Brooke Herder James says, I think the white spaces are almost like pockets of air. That's a good way to describe it. I would like to see it more consistent, though, just so it doesn't distract as much. If it's a thing that makes the poem feel a certain way, and it's a side tangent, but I think there's too much going on with it that makes you wonder, or makes me wonder anyway. And Mary Lisa also says, I think the broken lines are supposed to represent the broken building. Let's see. And Bree says the shape of the poem looks like the picture of the rubble. Tambrella says the poem was about a desperate time and the spacing fights against that, I think. So Jonathan Ronigan says the first line is the top of the rubble, tighter. Lower down, it is looser. Yeah, I mean, those are all good suggestions. I think it's kind of too much. To me, it's too much thought going into the structure of the poem and not enough. It just distracts from the content. So I think it's a matter of where you want to focus the reader's attention. And I think we get too much drawn into the shape of the poem because of the way it changes. I think it just doing a little less with that would make it interesting still and keep the interesting aspects of it, but without being as much of a distraction. So I'd keep it more consistent. Okay, so we like the first stanza we already mentioned. Let's go line by line and see what we can cut, because there is a lot of stuff. It feels too long. And like Katie said, I think a turn, and Clayton Clark agrees, I think a turn is needed somewhere. And him getting out of the rubble and what that would feel like maybe is where the turn is, because we stick and sort of spin here on the whistle so long, but then we don't go to what happens once she's found. Yeah, as Dick Westheimer puts it, though, and we'll stop talking about the form now, but Dick puts it perfectly. All the speculation about the intent of the form distracted from the flow of the poem. Exactly. And so if we're going to have a form like this, which I like, but I think it just needs to be consistent so that it's not such a distracting mystery to us, because that's not really where you want the attention of the reader drawn. Okay. So let's see. I think the first stanza is great. We're not going to change anything. Have you ever tried to whistle under the weight of rubble, the plaster and mortar and electric entrails of your home, walls collapsed on top of ceilings, on top of you? I wonder about this question. I'm not sure. Because, have you ever tried to whistle with a dry mouth? is something that we might have done and we can experience and we can imagine what that's like. But it's clear we've never tried to whistle under the weight of rubble. So I think repeating the structure, I think maybe that should change a little bit to reflect that like, imagine, have you ever tried to whistle with a dry mouth, blah, blah, blah. Imagine trying to whistle under the weight of rubble. Like I would change that to, like that maybe. I think it's distracting to ask a question that you know the answer to that's not rhetorical or something like that. So I would do something like that. Maybe not exactly that phrase, but shift in that direction for this question instead. Under the weight of the rubble, of what rubble and the plaster and mortar and electric entrails of your home, walls collapsed on top of ceilings, on top of you. When it says your home, I wonder, there's a sort of a trick you can do. I can say, like that desk next to you, and everybody, most people reading this have a desk next to them. And you can sort of describe the home as if it was actually your home by going with things that homes probably have and being detailed and concrete about it, and make it actually your home is an interesting way. Instead of the generic, like electric entrails and walls collapsed, talk about actual items that you would have in your home. And so we imagine it more in the same way we imagine the dry mouth, because we can all have a mouth that can get dry. So we can imagine whistling that way with a really dry mouth. We can imagine being buried in our own stuff in our own house. And that makes the poem a little more powerful too. So I think in here we could add some details about that. In the cruel card shuffle of cataclysmic seismic eruptions, an earthquake rupturing the foundations of your town, province, nation, fault lining the heart of your people into fissures of shock and grief. And so I think this is one of those things that's too general and too showing, not telling, and isn't really pushing the poem forward. And so for me, I think I would delete that and go back and just keep going with this. Buried beneath the place, because we go, imagine this, imagine the things, your own things buried on top of you or being buried with them, then buried beneath the place meant to keep us all safe. I imagine him under the jagged puzzle pieces of his kitchen table at which he sipped hot cave with cardamons just that morning. The grave burden of his splintered sanctity bearing down on his body. Familiar objects become threats. One hand, a scream of shattered bones already trapped for uncomfortable hours, but somehow he finds the shard of a song cradled like the longing for sweet melon in his mouth. The longing for sweet melon in his mouth is a great line too, both for sound and for that same dry whistle. We can imagine being thirsty and hungry and having that melon there. And so that's a really visceral experience that you're sharing it with that line. So I think it's a great line too. Saying it up through the cracks, the broken bricks of chaos. I think the broken bricks of chaos is nice phrase too. Just good sounds, all those hard consonant sounds. Somehow cocooned in dusty hours and darkness, the rasping husp of dehydration, he whistles a halting prayer, a wavering Morse code signal born on ragged breath, emissary of his still beating heart beneath the ruins. I think the emissary of his still beating heart goes on a little too long. I think and it's a little too forced. I would cut that too. I try to imagine that he whistled. Was it pop songs? And so here I don't feel it's authentic in this section. Imagine trying to imagine what he whistled as if he would whistle pop songs. I mean, he's going to be whistling just noise, the loudest sound he can make, hoping that the sound comes out. He's not going to be listening. And I think even speculating what he would be whistling is a little, it just doesn't feel like anything that was possible to me. Was it pop songs or lullabies his mother sang to him as a child to ward off fear of the dark, or the Turkish national anthem? I mean, we already talked about the mouth being so dry and full of dust, and there's just no way anybody would whistle songs in that circumstance and waste breath on invaluable air, on on a tune. And so I think it just doesn't seem real to me. So I think this is a false turn where it doesn't really help the poem much. Lisa Seidenberg wonders if we need anything after like the longing for sweet melon in his mouth. Could this just be the ending? Because that is a great last line, and we've experienced it. We've experienced at this point as a one-page poem now, the dryness of the air, and placed ourselves in there. And I wonder too, maybe we could end the poem here, but let's keep going and see. Let's see. I try to imagine what he whistled. Was it pop songs or lullabies his mother sang to him as a child to ward off fear of the dark, or the Turkish national anthem, robust notes rising up like the sprout of a seed, searching for a light? And I think this is too much. I wonder if when I copied... No, I didn't copy and paste, but I think that's too much of that. Yeah, Gianthe says, why is the word light broken up? It was made it hard to read for me, so I would not do that. Like the sprout of a seed, searching for light or for restitution. As day bled into night, not once but thrice, in his lightless underworld. How did he whistle without water? I think that's a great line. How did he whistle without water? Mouthful of dust, lungs grappling for air. Is it conceivable, yet the tenacity and bravery of Meerkat is fact? And here we get to another line that's very showing it. It's very telly and not showy. I would not include that. I mean, it's not making us feel anything. Where the poem is really working is where you're having musical language and making us feel like what it would feel like, or imagine what it would feel like being under the rubble and trying to whistle for your life. And having that sort of that distant, philosophical voice that comes in a few times is it loses that immediacy of being trapped in there. So that's the things I would cut out. That lines like this is inconceivable, yet the tenacity and bravery of Murad is a fact. That insertion detracts from the actual experience of the poem. As true as the magnitude of the earthquake, he outwhistled. I like that earthquake he outwhistled. I think that's a nice way to phrase that. True as the tears on my cheek as I watched the news in another hemisphere, hearing how on the fourth day rescuers heard him following his frail notes of hope, until an impossible miracle he rose from the rubble, hand broken, but the song and his spirit still strong. I wonder if... Because, the poem rests on this idea that it was a song. But if we could talk about the song as a one-note song, that would fit better for me and make more sense. But we didn't do that at all. We talked about lullabies and things like that, and I think it just feels off to me in that way. But if it was one, strong note that he carried, as loudly as he could, then I think that would make a lot more sense and fit with the ending. Let's see. Let's see. Brookharder James says, I completely agree with the suggestion to end the poem with a taste of melon in his mouth. This is the hopefulness that is filled by the end of the news story, which we know. Yeah, Kidder says the end feels forced. Tara McMahon says, love the ending at the melon line. Does it do enough as a poem? If we end at the melon line, which I think let's just pretend and end the poem there. Have you ever tried to whistle with a dry mouth, the lips unmoistened? Do not water the outgoing breath with melody. The concrete slab of tongue flounders tuneless in the parched cavern. Imagine trying to whistle under the weight of rubble, the plaster and mortar, and electric entrails of your home. Walls collapse on top of ceilings, on top of you, buried beneath the place meant to keep us all safe. I think that should be keep you safe, because we're still talking about in the second person that until this turn at the semicolon. I imagine him under the jagged puzzle pieces of his kitchen table at which he sipped. And I think I would. The I is unnecessary. If we end at the melon, which I'm leaning toward, then we would still keep. We had the imagine trying to whistle, right? And then this runs on through the sentence. So it's you, the assumed second person or whatever you'd say. So imagine trying to whistle, and then imagine him. And I think that keeps it with the reader. And I think that keeps it. What we want to do with this poem is keep us in the rubble so we can feel that experience. And I think adding the I in that interjection decreases that. So imagine him. And we can just get rid of the semicolon too, because why? Why not? So imagine him under the jagged puzzle pieces of his kitchen table at which he sipped hot cave with cardamons just that morning, the grave burden of his splintered sanctity bearing down on his body, familiar objects, I would say becoming threats. One hand, a scream of shattered bones already trapped for uncountable hours, but somehow he finds the shard of a song cradled like the longing for sweet melon in his mouth. Someone mentioned they don't like the 4. I think I'd keep the 4. I think that might be the end of the poem. I think we just delete the rest. And because which doesn't feel like it's found its ending anyway, I think we could push through and go, but I think the poem does a lot of work and makes us feel a lot by ending here. And then the only thing I would do with the rest is maybe make this, and it's already consistent with the stanzas being these 6-line stanzas, and maybe add some spacing here to make it a little more consistent, like this, Well, let me just really quickly add some spacing, kind of like this, maybe, just to keep that consistent. And then we have it like this, and maybe decrease these so it's a little more consistent too. But I think that might be a good poem. Alexander Bias says Splinter's sanctity sounds melodramatic, and I agree. I agree. Do we keep that line? Yeah, I would say just get rid of the splintered. It's too much. A good point. And yeah, I think the poem is great like this. Let's see, what else do we have? Shard of a song is good, though. Yeah, I think so, too. Like, we don't want to overdo it, because you want to have, there's a certain line to walk between drama and melodrama. And if you push it too far, it just sounds melodramatic. And I think you're right by saying that, Alexandria. Jerry Stephenson agrees. Yeah, I think this is the poem. Yeah, I think we're good here. This is what I would do. And then just shrink up these lines, too, just to make them a little more consistent with the form, so we don't have to wonder about why they're getting longer. But we don't have to do that right now. So yeah, I think the poem works really well like that. We've pulled out the stuff that doesn't work and kept the stuff that does, which focuses the attention on everything that works. And I think that the poem works really well that way. So, yeah, and we could just kind of, and what I mean by closing this up is just decreasing the amount of space so it's a little more consistent with the rest, but that's all. Okay, let's look at the other poem. But I think that hopefully, Melissa, if you want to keep going, I think there is a way, but it has to have the same sort of dramatic energy as the beginning, and I don't think it did. And there were just a lot of faults with it that would need to be fixed. And so I think, ending here is a really strong ending. So I think I would do that. Okay. Next poem. Again, this is Melissa Coffey, Dreaming Memory. I'm going to get a sip of coffee. So Jerry Stephenson says, I like this poem, a well-told story. Margaret Doyle really likes it too. Dick Wetchenheimer says, great edit. So often I find my poems improve when I slash many of my favorite lines from them. It's in service to the poem, not the treasure lines. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what it is we have to remember that the currency is really attention, and where the reader is paying by devoting time to the poem. And, we want that time to be valuable. And having a lot of stuff that's unnecessary and we don't need, just decreases the concentration, the value density of the poem. So, yeah. Okay. I think everybody's on the same page with this. Clayton Clark still wants a turn. And I don't know. I mean, I think a poem of this length, I think the melon in his mouth is a turn. It sort of encaptures in a very visceral way the feeling of escaping this situation, which we know he does because of the title. And we know that he survived based on the news story too. And so, and if he hadn't, then this poem wouldn't exist. The other thing that it does too, which is interesting, is it starts out with a mouth and ends with a mouth. The mouth being dry and then the mouth being moistened by this imagined melon. And so there's a nice symmetry to it too. So and I think this points enough to escape, and the shard of a song too, because he finds the shard of a song cradled in like a longing for sweet melon in his mouth. He finds that, and so because he finds it, we sort of know that there's a good ending and that he was found. And I think that to me, that's enough of a turn for a shorter poem. If we had a longer poem that was like 3 pages, we would want it to expand and find something new in the actual like act of him being rescued, or some way to make that another sense of movement. But I think at this length, I think it works fine like this. So, okay, let's read the other one. Dreaming Memory. Afloat in this oceanic unconscious realm, tossed from one dream wave to another, leaving nothing but swirling fractals of myself behind, minuscule particles soon dissolved. Dreaming memory works in reverse, instantly destroying what was made. I wake with salt on my cheek, wondering, are they tears or traces of sleeping mind's aqueous imaginings? Now that Hypnos has had his way with me, holding me under his watery spell of sleep, every night I must learn again how to breathe underwater, growing gills where the skin of my neck is softest. Drifting through cities I visited as a child, submerged like nostalgic Atlantises, once familiar buildings looming over me, swimming above the wreckage of abandoned longings. Drunken ghost ships lean forever starboard with no stars, nevermore to guide their path. I try not to get trapped in their half-loosed sails and ringing, groaning hulls, emitting strange cries like lost whales. I've survived another night. If you reach out to touch me now, will your fingers pass right through me, or slow down, as if moving through water? I am barely there, watching my feet walk far below me in this liminal place between the ocean of sleep and the grainy shores of waking life. I walk like the fairy tale mermaid given legs to dance for her prince. I hover with the memory of a mermaid's tail, hesitant to disperse this tenuous sea foam state. Neither sleep nor wake, solid nor liquid, senses and sounds about me both muffled and magnified, as if my head is underwater, my body retaining cellular imprints of myself at different stages. I am 16, walking the ocean's edge, breasts bared to the breeze. I am 25, relishing sand between toes, hand in hand with my dark-haired poet. I am 5, holding hands with my mother as we hunt for shells on a never-ending tropical beach. And the sun, and the sun, and the sun, always the sun, as it brightens and blazes and burns. I tell myself to keep hold, mother, lover, younger self, to bring them back with me, an alchemical time-space miracle. But as his bed becomes more solid beneath me, they disintegrate like sand, flowing and falling away from my fingertips. I will myself stay here, just a moment, and 1 moment more. Hush, world, don't wake me yet. That is Dreaming Memory. And again, I think the poet Melissa Coffey here is a sort of a maximalist type poet who sort of overwrites, as we can see from the first poem too. And this is a case here too, where there's a heart of the poem and there's a lot of writing around it. And what we really want to focus on, just in general, looking at these 2 poems, is condensing and cutting out, thinking about that currency of attention, and how, so there's things that are great use of language. There's a great rhythm to this. There's a great natural storytelling ability, but I'm spending much more time on it than I'm like getting back for my time that I'm investing in it. And I'm sort of, there's places I feel engaged and places I feel bored. And I think we need to focus on what works and what doesn't. For this prose poem, which is what it really is, I would make it one paragraph about this length. I think that's about how much it sustains itself for, and mostly this paragraph here, which I thought works best. So do you even need the first paragraph? What if it was Dreaming Memory? Now that Hypnos has had its way with me, what if we just started there? So afloat. Let's see what we lose if we cut out this. Afloat in this oceanic unconscious realm, tossed from one dream wave to another, leaving nothing but swirling fractals of myself behind. Minuscule particles soon dissolve. Dreaming memory works in reverse, instantly destroying what it was made. I wake with salt on my cheek, wondering, are they tears or traces of sleep's mind's aqueous imaginings? And I don't think I don't think that adds anything. And so I think we can cut this and jump right in there. And I think it's a problem when you have, skill at description and in language like that, like Melissa does, that you can write really interesting sentences and lines, but they still have to have meaningful content. And I think, I don't think that was necessary, that first stanza. But let's see, if we were dreaming memory, we jump right in here. Now that Hypnos has had his way with me, holding me under his watery spell of sleep, every night I must learn again to breathe underwater. I don't even know if you need this first line. I mean, the Hypnos doesn't come up again. What if it just starts at every night? Every night I must learn how to breathe underwater. Growing gills where the skin of my neck is softest, drifting through cities I visited as a child, submerged like nostalgic Atlantises, once familiar buildings looming over me. Swimming above the wreckage of abandoned longings, drunken ghost ships lean forever starboard with no stars, never more to guide their path. I try not to get trapped in their half-loose sails and rigging, groaning hulls, emitting strange cries like lost whales. I've survived another night. And then I think, do we need this stanza? If you reached out to me now, because who's the you? Will your fingers pass right through me or slow down as if moving through water? I'm barely there, watching my feet walk far below me in this liminal place between the ocean of sleep and its grainy shores of waking life. So it's very, very telly again. And instead of just like letting us experience it, like we get into the starboard ships, I think, and the half loose sails and rigging and those details. We become what we want to do with a poem is the speaker's voice inhabits our body. It plays my breath like an instrument, right? And we want to become the speaker. And that feeling of being an other, that's why a poem is an empathy machine, is because we can jump in the body of some other voice and feel that. And I think when you get to describing that too abstractly, it loses that sense of being in the voice. And so I think maybe, if you reach out to touch me now, it's a too distant way of thinking. Like we're not immersed in the dream because the speaker is thinking about what we might do, which is a layer removed. So I think if it gets stronger too, if we cut this one and then just add that. Neither sleep nor wake, solid nor liquid senses and sounds about me, both muffled and magnified as if my head is underwater. My body retaining cellular imprints of myself at different ages. I am 16, waking. I think this run too. I think maybe this. Let's see. Where is there anything we can cut? If my head is wondering, my body is running cellular imprints. Yeah. So I think maybe I cut this too. My body retaining cellular imprints of myself at different ages. I think that's too abstract too. So we're really paring down this poem, but I think that's what's needed because there's great content, but there's too much of a remove. So senses and sounds about me both muffled and magnified as if my head is underwater. I am 16, so we just jump right into being 16, walking the ocean's edge, breasts bared to the breeze. I am 25, relishing sand between toes, hand in hand with my dark-haired poet. I am 5, holding hands with my mother as we hunt for shells on the never-ending tropical beach. And the sun and the sun and the sun, always the sun as it brightens and blazes and burns. That might be the last line too. Let me see, what else do we do? I tell myself to keep hold. Mother, lover, younger self, to bring them back with me in alchemical space, but as the bed becomes more solid beneath me, they disintegrate like sand, flowing and falling away through my fingertips. I will myself to stay here just a moment, and one moment more. Hush, world, don't wake me yet. I'm just gonna get rid of Ryan. He's not ready yet. So I think, every time we get into this like sense of one layer removed, I would cut. And I think this is a good ending. So for me, if keeping it as a prose poem, I would do it like this, which is the length I mentioned before, isn't it? So get this down a little bit. So here, I think this and the sun and the sun and the sun, always the sun as it brightens and blazes and burns. I think that leaves us with something interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, what we want to think of is, that what we're doing too with a reader is a dance, and you want to lead, not drag them places. You want to let your dance partner, participate in the decisions of movement that you're going to make, and leaving it on images like this lets us make connections and think about the poem and participate. As the poem inhabits our body, we get to participate with it too. And so I think, which is why we ended with the melon last time, and it works so much better. And it could end here too for the same exact reason. So this is why we look at two poems, because we see tendencies and things to think about just in general with your writing. And so here, like I said, I think the poet is one of those poets that puts a lot out, but then really what we have to do is rein it in and find the heart of what we're doing and focus on that. And I think the poem works a lot better like this. So dreaming memory every night. Let's read it one more time, then we'll move on to the next poet. This is the new, very short version, but feel how much better it works. Dreaming memory. Every night I must learn again how to breathe underwater, growing gills where the skin of my neck is softest. So right now we jump into that, as somebody said, where is it? The edited beginning adds a certain intrigue. Like, I'm really curious about this. Every night I must learn how to breathe underwater, growing gills where the skin of my neck is the softest. Like, this is another thing like that dry mouth at the beginning of the first poem, where it's very tangible. We can imagine that, and we're right in the scene, and we're experiencing it. We're experiencing that dream. Drifting through cities I visited as a child, submerged like nostalgic Atlantises. I think I would cut the Atlantises too. I think that's too abstract again. So I think we drop that as well. Drifting through cities I visited as a child, once familiar buildings looming over me, swimming above the wreckage of abandoned longings, drunken ghost ships lean forever starboard with no stars, never more to guide their path. I try not to get trapped in their half-loosed sails and ringing, groaning hulls, emitting strange cries like lost whales. I survived another night, neither asleep nor awake, solid nor liquid, senses and sound about me both muffled and magnified as if my head is underwater. I am 16, walking the ocean's edge, breast bare to the breeze. I am 25, relishing sand between my toes, hand in hand with my dark-haired poet. I'm 5, holding hands with my mother as we hunt for shells on a never-ending tropical beach. And the sun, and the sun, and the sun, always the sun as it brightens and blazes and burns. Yeah, so I think it just works better like that, and it keeps us engaged and interested the whole time. Let's see. Margaret Doyle points out the poet has a very distinctive voice in both poems. I agree. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we've done a lot with these poems, so I hope you found this helpful, Melissa. But really, as people have said, great voice. It really is distinct and interesting. Jerry Stephenson says just needs form, but needs form. I don't know. I mean, there's a whole tradition of prose poems that you can look up that are, what's his name? Russell Edson and Jose Hernandez, is that his name? I'm drawing a blank in his name right now. We have that great windmill farm that I love. There's a way that there's a hybrid between poetry and fiction that works really well in this form, and I think this could work as that. Okay, let's move on because I'm trying to make these just an hour, but they're just so fun. I go on too long every time. Anyway, we'll try to get through Ryan McCarty's poems. Well, we definitely will. We'll try to get through quickly. Ryan McCarty, Students of the Season. This is the second poet for today. Let me get rid of this. There we go. Students of the Seasons. Even the rich kids I am paid to teach make beautiful sounds when the first snow sneaks up and shakes down on them. They're frozen. Their cameras are out. They steal one memory from the sky and leave nothing behind but shrieks running from the cold. But the glory is in the eyes of the boy up since the steam of furnaces kicking on, eventually knocking to invite my daughter out into playful performances. I see 4 other sets of tracks coming and going, coming and going, coming and going, the marks of polite waiting mixed up with simple need. He is warm, bundled like the ragged burrs of motherwort sleeping in the dirt along the edge of the field. He will rise and feed the bees in spring. Well, that's a very rich poem. Let's see. Okay. Well, so I love Students of the Seasons is an interesting title because it's not what you really think it's going to be. And I love this opening line. Even the rich kids I am paid to teach make beautiful sounds when the first snow sneaks up and shakes down on them. It's a great first line. I mean, there's so much there. It's so densely packed with meaning. Even the rich kids I'm paid to teach make beautiful and good line breaks too, where every line break is a turn to something surprising. Even the rich kids I'm paid to teach make beautiful sounds. Using beautiful, thinking about the sounds they make is a really a way to make it more full of the senses. So it's a rich opening too. Sneaks up and shakes down on them. They're frozen. Their cameras are out. I love this line too. They steal one memory from the sky and leave nothing behind but shrieks running from the cold. But the glory is in the eyes of the boy, up since the stream of furnaces kicking on, eventually knocking to invite my daughter out into playful performances. I see 4 other sets of tracks coming and going, and marks of polite waiting mixed up with simple need. He is warm, bundled like ragged burrs of motherwort. Yeah, James Langford asked what motherwort is. I'm not sure. I'll have to look it up. So motherwort is a plant that grows about 1 meter high, and parts that are used to make medicine. Let's see. Other common names include throwwort and lion's ear. Lion's tail is a common name. Burrs of motherwort. Well, here's a picture of motherwort, and these are the burrs, I guess. So here, it's motherwort for you. I don't know. It might be a too far removed description. Something that most people aren't going to be able to imagine. Let's see, where did it go? 4 sets of tracks, coming, going, the marks of polite waiting, mixed up with simple need. He is warm bundled like the ragged burrs of motherwort. The bundled burrs is a nice sound there. Sleeping in the dirt along the edge of the field. He will rise and feed the bees in spring. So the whole thing is a metaphor, obviously. At the end, and a really nice one too. I think there's a real, you talk about turns and movement in this poem. There's a lot too, because we go from the rich kids and their sounds, and then this scene where we're sort of imagining what's happening based on the tracks. And I like it. I like that sense of movement. There's a little bit of I think it could be condensed a little bit. Let's see. But the glory is in the eyes of the boy, up since the steam of furnaces kicking on. I think that's a good description there. Eventually knocking to invite my daughter out into playful performances. I think playful performances doesn't have as much, it's not as concrete or as rich as the rest of the poem. So I think something better here. I see 4 other sets of tracks coming and going. I think the repeating the coming and going, bores me a little bit. 4 other tracks coming and going. The marks of polite waiting mixed up with simple need. I don't know. What does this add? The other 4 sets of tracks coming and going. The marks of polite waiting mixed up with simple need. And then we go back to the boy. So why do we have to go to these tracks? I'm just not quite sure. Why can't we just have the boy? Like that. The eyes of the boy up since the steam of furnaces kicking on, eventually knocking to invite my daughter out into playful performances, which I would still change. But he is warm bundled like the ragged birds of motherwort sleeping in the dirt road along the edge of the field. He will rise and feed the bees in spring. I love the ending. I love the beginning. But I don't know, something just feels off in this section right here for me. I'm not quite sure. The transition between how to get from the beginning to the end is what is sort of not working as well as it could for me in the poem. See if anybody has any suggestions. So Jenny Millen says, I think performances used to rhyme with furnaces, but a more visual word could be used. Let's see. Powder Donahue says, he will rise and feed the bees in spring is so good. Why do I hate it? And that's funny. And then, is it unctuous? Or too, Alexandria could suggest maybe, does it sound too self-conscious and artsy? Yeah, I don't know. I think we could just cut and just focus on the boy, because we have the start of the poem is students of the seasons, right? We have even the rich kids I'm paid, even the rich kids that I'm paid, blah, 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 like this. But the glory is in the eyes of the boy. Can we just smooth it into that? Let's see. How do we do that? Eventually knocking to invite my daughter out. And what if we just cut this and just left it, kind of like this. Oh man, it's doing that. Okay, but what if we just moved from one to the other? So we just had this simple setup. Even the rich kids care about, love the snow like this, but the real glory is in this boy. And then we have the image of the boy. So it ends up being a really simple short poem. John Atkinson says is the first word helping, the word even. And it does, because that's the parallel structure of the poem. It's comparing, even the rich kids do this, but the glory is this. And I think that works and is necessary. But we can just move it without the tracks thing that just doesn't live up to the rest of the poem to me. But the glory is in the eyes of the boy, up since the steam of furnaces kicking on, eventually knocking to invite my daughter out. Warm, bundled like the ragged birds of motherwort sleeping. Yeah, I guess maybe do need... I think let's see. I'm not sure exactly what you want. I think you do need to sort of stop there. I think that he is a little... I think you need a hyphen there too, but I don't know, there's some way... Somebody could say that a little more smoothly. Not his is, he is. But just moving right to that image, I think, works. What if it was like this? What if it was, what if we do cut this and just say, warm bundled like the ragged birds of motherwort sleeping in the dirt along the field? Like, make that all one sentence. He will rise and feed the bees in spring. And Josh Williams suggests he will rise in spring and feed the bees. I don't know about that difference, but I think just smoothing that out is all that this poem needs. And we could look at the original if we wanted. I don't know. I think that's all I have to add, I think. Does anybody else have anything? It's just a good poem, so there's not a whole lot. Just a little, as Jerry Stephenson said right away, I'm 2 thumbs up on this. Start is all the bonus. A little tweaking. Yeah, you're right about the tracking. Yeah, I think that's all we need is just to smooth that, because all we want. We don't want to. The problem before, and let's show the other poem. I'm saving the originals now, which makes it work a little better. So we'll go to this document and then go down. In the original, when we get there, the problem is we had 3 things to sort of keep track of when really only 2 had meaning. So we have the rich kids here, with their cameras out and all that, but then the glory being in the eyes of the boy. But then we get the 4 other tracks. I think that other tracks are just a distraction. So it's really comparing. It's saying like even the rich kids do this, but this boy is the most interesting, and so having these other ones in the polite is just sort of a side track that doesn't add anything to the poem, as you can see by flipping back. So that's all I think I do, because there's great. I mean, I love the beginning, I love the end, and I would just do that. I think the poem's done. Unless anybody else has. Yeah, I mean, it was good to begin with, exactly like Mary Lisa says. Okay. So Alexandria and Josh Williams both do think that it's more musical if you move the spring. Let's just see how it sounds. He will rise in spring and feed the bees. So it'd be like that. He will rise in spring and feed the bees. Oops, I'm on the wrong file. Here. Okay, so I'm warm bundled like the ragged burrs of motherwort sleeping in the dirt along the edge of the field. He will rise in spring and feed the bees. Yeah, I agree. I think that is a slight improvement, so thanks for doing that. Katie Dozier prefers it as is, though. Oh, Alexander Bias says I liked it better originally. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I really could go either way. He will rise in spring and feed the bees. He will rise and feed the bees in spring. Yeah, I don't know. I'd go either way. He could rise and feed the bees in spring. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I could go either way. It's where you want the emphasis to be. I think with a student of seasons, the emphasis on spring at the end is probably better. I don't know. It's such a small thing. I think it's fine either way. Okay. Katie says it feels forced switching it. Oh, take out rise. It says Sharon. I wonder what that. He will. Yeah. What if it was like this? Just take that out. Warm bundled like the ragged birds of motherwort sleeping in the dirt along the edge of the field. He will feed the bees in spring. I kind of like that too. I don't know. It's really such, minor tinkering at that point. Kater says, I love the ending in spring because of the title. Yeah, I think that makes more sense because of that. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we should move on. But that was a really good poem. So not much to say. Just a little smoothing out. I like the rise, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're such tiny tinkers. I don't know. It's just up to your personal preference at that point. Okay. Let's go to the next poem. This is again Ryan McCarty. The poem is Neighbors. He asked if I knew this girl and listed all the places they wore each other out before telling me she'd got too much in her this morning. On my porch, that man cried, all his swagger turned under like the backs of his shoes, wet beneath 2 cracked heels. Fuck that shit. I don't want nothing I need every day to live. I loved her, man. Her name was Sarah, and she stomped back and forth along the side streets yelling into her phone. I knew a junkie when I saw one, but on an April morning she smiled and waved, laughed at me breaking the earth at my feet to keep a tree from molding up the side, called the world full of great ideas. Now she's gone. Well, that's interesting. Neighbors. And so the title actually kind of works well to set up what's going on with the poem, because we don't really know what neighbors means, but it makes a lot more sense that the relationship once when we look back at the title after reading the poem. So I think that works well too. He asked if I knew this girl and listed all the places they wore each other out before telling me she'd got too much in her this morning. I like that. All the places they wore each other out. It's a really cool way of describing things. Both poems have great use of sort of unusual descriptions. Potter says, this speaks, paints a picture, but has elements of enigma. Count me in. Yeah, it does. On my porch, that man cried. All his swagger turned under like the backs of his shoes, wet beneath 2 cracked heels. Fuck that shit. I don't want nothing I need every day to live. I loved her, man. Her name was Sarah, and she stomped back and forth along the side street. I just wonder if you need this. This contrast with the fuck that shit I kind of like because of the elegance of the rest of the poem. But I'm not sure if it's necessary because he's already crying. We can imagine that relationship. So she'd got too much in her this morning. On my porch, that man cried. All his swagger turned under like the backs of his shoes, wet beneath 2 cracked heels. But I don't know. Do we need this? One of the main things that Janet Fitch talked about in the few fiction classes I did in college was, to not use dialogue unless it's really adding something to the story. Because there's so much empty dialogue and it saps the weight of the writing, even in fiction too. We want dialogue to always have like a function and to serve a real purpose. And you also can't have long monologues because they're not realistic. And so I think here it doesn't really add anything. And so I think I just cut it. We know that she died. We know that he cried and he's upset right on the porch. So I don't think you need it. I think the poem's stronger without it. He asked if I knew this girl and listed all the places they wore each other out before telling me she'd got too much in her this morning. On my porch, that man cried. All his swagger turned under like the backs of his shoes, wet beneath 2 cracked heels. Her name was Sarah, and she stomped back and forth along the side streets yelling into her phone. I knew a junkie when I saw one. But on April morning, she smiled and waved, laughed at me breaking the earth at my feet to keep a tree from molding up the side, called the world full of great ideas. Now she's gone. I think that's a really nice tribute to the neighbors. Yeah, leave out the dialogue. Everyone's saying cut it, and I think so too. I think the poem's just better without the dialogue. It seems gratuitous, says Brooke Herder James, and I agree. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Dick Westrom, I think, talking about this poem, it says it paints a great scene, really good, but I'm not sure what is revealed here beyond the scene making. I think it's the way that we have, because of the title. I think that's why I was saying the title works so well, because this becomes a scene that tells a lot about the way we interact with neighbors, about how we get these tiny glimpses in their lives, but don't really know them, but they're like, fully fleshed out human beings too. And so there's that sense of how neighbors are, like the glimpses of neighbors that I think works really well. And so the story is like an allegory for our relationships with neighbors, because we do have these moments. I mean, I have a neighbor downstairs and her dog died just last week. And so we had sort of moments like that where we had glimpses into her life but we don't really know her that well either, because she's just a neighbor. And, so there's that experience a lot. And I think that this serves an allegory for that type of human experience, that where you have, just because you happen to be there. There was some poem, I'm trying to think of a poem that, what was it? But there's a poem something like this about I think we might have, maybe it's something that's not published yet. I think it might be something we accepted recently. But there's a poem that's sort of similar about how, like at one night, I think the neighbor had some kind of health emergency and they took him to the hospital. I think that was the plot of the poem. But then they don't know anything. They don't even know her name, and that's the kind of feel like you get this intimacy, but there's like a detachment too. And because of the title Neighbors, I think that works to make the poem more than just a little skit about these two people. So let me look at this poem a little more closely. I think the poem works really well. Both these poems are like almost too good to critique. Neighbors. He asked if I knew this girl and listed all the places they wore each other out before telling me she'd got too much in her this morning. Just a great first sentence, like the last poem, a great opening. On my porch, that man cried, all his swagger turned under like the backs of his shoes, wet beneath two cracked heels. Her name was Sarah. I liked that her name was Sarah, and she stomped back and forth along the side streets yelling into her phone. I knew a junkie when I saw one, but on an April morning, she smiled and waved, laughed at me, breaking the earth at my feet to keep a tree from molding up the side. Called the world full of great ideas. Now she's gone. Yeah. The breaking the earth at my feet to keep a tree from molding up the side. I'm not sure what that is. I can kind of imagine, but I'm not sure why. I guess I must not know enough about trees. But calling the world full of great ideas. I love the ending, the simplicity of now she's gone. Because that's true of so many people too. So I think there's a lot contained in that. And a lot of times the most powerful poem or lines in a poem are just the most simple. Now she's gone. Artistic World says not sure if the poem says what was intended. I don't know. I mean, how do we know it was intended? I think it says something. Jenny Middleton says, I think the poem is about contrast and empathy with the neighbors and on a larger scale with others in society. Yeah, I think that's part of it too, for sure. Vanessa Van Graff says, looks really good now. It's universal. I know a Sarah. Yeah. Marguerite Doyle says, maybe I'd cut I knew a junkie when I saw one, as it's already obvious he's a junkie. But then someone else says, Vanessa says, need the junkie line to understand. Yeah, I think you need the junkie line. I mean, I think you need the junkie line to know that he knew that, at the time that she was a junkie. I don't think you need it. I don't think you need to know she was a junkie, but I think it's important to know that he knew, and that was part of that relationship. And that glimpse into something more, like some more connection, even though she was a junkie. And so I think that line's necessary. I would keep it. All I would do is cut the line. Brooke Herder James says, why the butt after the junkie line? And that's the thing, because even though she was a junkie and he sort of dismissed her as that, they still had this moment in this little connection where she says the world was full of great ideas. Yeah. And so, but even though she was junkie, we still had this connection. So I think that works too. And the naming, notice how important it is. He doesn't say the other guy's name, but he names her as Sarah. How important that detail is too. That it's something specific and concrete. And that he's sad that she's gone, even though they only had this one moment and he didn't know her very well, So I think this poem works really well too. I mean, I wish I could say more about these poems, but they're good poems. And they're short too, so there's not a lot of, they're already sort of cut. The only thing here is this getting rid of the, it did make the stanzas the same length. I mean, if we flip over to the other, the original, having that, the fuck that shit, I don't want nothing I need every day to live, I loved her, man. That makes these, I think to my eye, it's the same number of stanzas, which is a nice sort of parallel. Jen Atkins said, did dialogue not say he loved her? This is the dialogue of her boyfriend here. So, and I think that's what we don't need, because the boyfriend's crying. That man cried. All his swagger turned under like backs of his shoes. And this isn't the speaker. That's why it's italicized. This is the man here, her boyfriend, you assume, or her friend. Yeah. And so I think you just don't need the dialogue. And that's all we really cut, right? That's all we changed. It's just the dialogue doesn't have the strength and isn't necessary of the rest of the poem. If it was something really interesting that he said, then you could keep it. There's a contrast to the touchingness of the scene and the fuck that shit that works, but it's not enough, I think, to justify the dialogue. So I cut the dialogue, and that's all we do with this poem. They're poems that are almost ready to go. We'll switch back to this edit, which isn't much different. Anyway, yeah, there's 2 good poems. So thanks for sharing those. Got really good poems today. Fun discussion. I think that's all we're going to say. Thanks for sharing those. That was Ryan McCarty with Neighbors and Students of the Seasons. And all we did, we cut a lot today. It was like, it was cut day, apparently, but we cut 60% of Dreaming Memory out and made it more of a prose poem. Is it just Jose Hernandez? Who am I thinking of? Is it? Let me see. Hernandez Diaz. I'm sorry. Jose Hernandez Diaz, who has he's got some prose poems in Rattle that I really like. And he does a lot of prose poems. This is the Windmill Farm. Sort of taking off of Russell Edson and that tradition of prose poems. There's a whole bunch of people. There's some great books. I think I have on the shelf there. I might have the Sudden Fiction book, which is super short, like this stories. I really like. I'd call them prose poems myself. W.S. Merwin wrote a bunch of great ones, and there's a whole history of this. And I think that poem works well as a short, with its sort of surrealness of the dream. Moving around itself. It was interesting. And then the last poem, of course, was Whistles Under the Rubble, which we just cut in half, basically, and ended at that melon, which was great. It made the whole poem work, I thought. So we just cut a lot today. It was a day of cutting, but having good stuff to cut around. Like you have a great, piece of steak or something, and you just have to trim some of the fat. That's how it felt. Anyway, that is the show for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. A lot of fun, as it always is. This week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be John W. Evans. John, if you're a subscriber, you've got the Fight Journal, the poem, with one long poem. The title poem in there is about 25 pages, I think, about his divorce, and then some poems surrounding it, too. A chronicle of that and his history, too. Really interesting book. It was a wonderful read. That is John W. Evans, The Fight Journal, which comes with all subscriptions. If you aren't a Rattle subscriber, you can subscribe and get that chapbook along with 3 others, plus 4 issues of Rattle, all for $25. What a deal. You can't beat that. I mean, really, you can't. It's such a good deal. Because of the volume that we print. It's pretty cheap to print, and then they're all mailed together, which just saves money, and it just... we might as well make the most of all our resources. And that's what we do with the Rattle Chapbook series and with subscriptions to Rattle. So hope you enjoy. If you enjoyed that book, you can ask John any questions you have about it. He'll share some other poems too, I'm sure. That's going to be Rattlecast number 187. The prompt for this week was to... Wait a second. Wait for it. Personify a place you've lived as if it were a character sketch of a real person. And that was after Rachel Custer's book, which is sort of all character sketches, or mostly last week's guest. So write your own character sketch, but of a place. So personify a place where you've lived, somewhere that's local to you anyway, with a character sketch as if it were a real person, which is the fun part of it. So we could just imagine you're talking about a person, but really it's the place personified. Should be fun. That's going to be your prompt for this week. Rattlecast number 187 with John W. Evans, Monday, March 27th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.